I don't usually tell this story. Not because it's painful, it's not anymore, but because every time I try to explain it, it comes out wrong. It comes out like a fairy tale, and it wasn't. It was cold mornings and panic attacks in the walk-in freezer, and 3 people who had absolutely no business opening a restaurant deciding to open a restaurant anyway. So let me start at the beginning, the real beginning, not the part where he walked in, before that. The 3 of us grew up in Rockford, Illinois, which is the kind of city that teaches you early that wanting things is a private activity. You don't say it out loud. You don't make plans in front of people. You just keep your head down and work and hope that one day the math changes. We met in middle school, Jordan and I, in 7th grade home economics when he corrected the teacher on her croissant technique and almost got sent to the principal's office, and Caleb the year after when he showed up new and quiet for exactly 1 week before everyone in the building knew his name. 3 kids from 3 different kinds of broke, which sounds like the beginning of a joke, but was just our life. What we had between us was this. Jordan could make anything from flour and butter and will alone, and he needed people to feed the way some people need air. Caleb could walk into a room full of strangers and leave it full of friends, and underneath all that ease was a hunger so carefully hidden that most people never saw it at all. And me, I just noticed things. I noticed people. I noticed what they needed before they knew to ask for it. We stayed in Rockford longer than we should have. That's the truth of it. Not because we didn't have dreams. We had too many. And Rockford has a way of making you feel like dreams are something that happened to other people, somewhere else, with better luck and softer starts. We worked and saved and talked and almost left about a dozen times over the years. Then Jordan's grandmother got sick and left him when she passed exactly $200 and a recipe box held shut with a rubber band. He called us both that night and said, "We're going to Chicago. We're going to open a restaurant. I don't want to talk about whether it's a good idea." Caleb said, "I've been packed for 2 years." I didn't say anything. I just pulled out the coffee money I'd been keeping in an envelope at the back of my sock drawer, counted it, and figured out what we had. Not much. Enough. We left on a Saturday in February, 3 people in a car with everything we owned and a destination, and no guarantee that any of it would work. Rockford in the rear view getting smaller, Chicago in the windshield getting real. Jordan was talking the whole way. Caleb had his feet on the dashboard. I drove. And I didn't hum, not then, but I thought about my grandmother's kitchen and the way she could make nothing into something. And I kept driving. That's how it started. There's a stretch of West Randolph Street in Chicago that smells like everything at once. Coffee and exhaust and someone's leather jacket and the lake. Always the lake, hanging underneath it all like a memory you can't quite place. We found the space in February. The building was small and narrow, and the previous tenant had left behind 3 bar stools, a coffee-stained menu board, and a sign that said closed that we never actually took down because we thought it was funny. We thought a lot of things were funny back then. We laughed because the alternative was crying, and crying takes energy we didn't have. We had $600 between us. Jordan spent $212 on a second-hand commercial mixer that he found on Craigslist and drove 3 hours to pick up in a borrowed van that smelled like dog. Caleb spent $87 on a whiteboard, markers, and some very specific fonts he printed at the library for the sign. I spent the rest, $301 on green coffee beans, a small roasting setup I'd been building from parts for 2 years, and 1 bag of Ethiopian yirgacheffe that I told myself was a business expense, but was really just something I needed to survive. We named the place Last Card, because that's what it was. That was our last card. We painted the sign ourselves. Jordan did the letters, big, uneven block print that looked handmade because it was, and Caleb did the smaller words underneath, breakfast done right since this morning. We stood outside at 11 o'clock on a Sunday night looking at it, and Caleb said, "We're going to make it." And Jordan said, "We're absolutely going to make it." And I said nothing because I didn't trust my voice. I believed them, though. I always believed them. West Randolph is a restaurant street. It has been for years. Chefs come here to prove things. The block we landed on was, well, not the glamorous end. We were tucked between a dry cleaner and what used to be a print shop. Directly to our right, however, was a glass tower that went so high you had to lean back to see the top of it. cold and silver and so clean it almost looked fake. The lobby had a waterfall, an indoor waterfall. I know because I walked past it once trying to find the mailbox and stood there for probably 45 seconds just staring at the water going nowhere. Ashford Group. That's what it said on the building. Big silver letters. Ashford Group. I didn't know what that meant at the time. I was 26 and from Rockford, and the only conglomerate I had ever had an opinion about was whoever made my grandmother's cheap coffee maker. Jordan knew. Jordan grew up reading business magazines the way other kids read comic books, something inherited from his father, who Jordan would tell you he was nothing like, and who Jordan was exactly like. He told us, the night we signed the lease, that Ashford Group was basically the reason the Midwest exists. I told him that seemed like an overstatement. He said I clearly did not read enough. He was probably right. But here's the thing. When you're opening a restaurant on $300, you don't really have room in your brain for the building next door. You have room for your morning prep list. You have room for what to do when the espresso machine coughs twice before pulling the shot. You have room for Jordan threatening to quit every Thursday and Caleb making everyone laugh in the way the early light hits the counter on a clear Tuesday morning and turns everything gold. That's what you have room for. That's all. We opened on a Wednesday in March. 4 tables, counter seating for 5, a menu that had 12 things on it, all of them done very, very well because Jordan West would rather die than do something halfway. We had 1 espresso machine, a pour-over station, a drip setup for the people who weren't ready for anything fancy, and a hand-painted chalkboard with the daily special. The first morning, 3 people came in. One of them was a woman who said the biscuits tasted like her grandmother's, and then sat in the corner table for 2 hours, not ordering anything else, just sitting. We let her. Caleb said she was our good luck charm. Jordan said she was in a health code gray area. I made her a second coffee on the house when her cup got cold, and she looked up at me like I'd done something remarkable. I hadn't. I just noticed the cup. That's my whole thing, really. I notice things. By week 4, we had regulars. By week 6, we had a line on Saturday mornings, and Jordan had started crying in the walk-in once a week, not from sadness, he explained, but from his feelings being too large for his body, which is extremely Jordan West and which all 3 of us accepted without comment. Caleb ran the front. He always ran the front. There's something about Caleb Monroe at a counter, something about the way he looks at a person who just walked in tired and cold and already defeated by 9 a.m. that makes them feel like they've arrived somewhere, like the walk from the door to the stool was the last hard thing they had to do. He has a gift. I've never been able to explain it scientifically. I just know that people sat down and last card feeling like problems and stood up feeling like people again, and a lot of that was Caleb. The other part was the coffee. I'm not saying that to be arrogant. I'm saying it because it's the truest thing I know about myself. I am not particularly good at most things, but I am very, very good at this. Coffee for me is not a transaction, it's a conversation. Every cup I make, I'm trying to say something specific to a specific person. The roast, the ratio, the temperature, the extraction time, all of it is adjusted to who I think they are and what I think they need. Most people don't notice, they just know it tastes right. Some people noticed. He noticed. It was a Tuesday, 7 weeks after we opened. I know it was a Tuesday because we did our standing inventory on Tuesday mornings, and I had just finished counting the last of the Guatemalan Antigua and writing it on the clipboard and feeling quietly pleased about our numbers when the door opened and the bell went and I looked up. And there he was. I'm going to be honest with you, my first thought was not, there's the man who is trying to buy our building. That came later. My first thought was something much simpler and much more inconvenient, which was, oh. Just that. Oh. He was tall. Dark coat, good wool, well-fitted, the kind of coat you own for 10 years and it still looks like the first day. He wasn't looking around the way new customers usually do, the slightly overwhelmed scan for menu and seating options. He walked in and stopped, and the expression on his face was, I'm going to call it decompression, like pressure releasing from a sealed container. Like he'd been somewhere very loud for a very long time and had just walked into quiet. He sat down at the counter without being told to, second stool from the left, and then he just sat. Didn't look at the menu board, didn't take out his phone, just sat with his hands around nothing and breathed. Caleb was on the far end, dealing with a table situation involving a very complicated oat milk question. Jordan was in the back. It was just me. I looked at this man for approximately 4 seconds. I knew what he needed. I didn't ask. I never ask when I already know. Asking feels wrong somehow, like it breaks something. I just turned to the machine and I pulled a single shot, Ethiopian Yirgacheffe, medium roast, clean. No milk, no sugar, just the coffee, honest and straightforward, and a little bright and a little dark at the same time, the way that particular bean always is when you do it right. I put the cup in front of him. He looked at it for a moment, then he picked it up and he drank. I watched him. I couldn't not watch him, and I saw the exact second it hit. It was subtle. A very small exhale. The shoulders dropped approximately 1 centimeter. The line between his brows, which had been quietly clenched since he walked in, smoothed. He sat there for almost a full minute, just breathing, just drinking. Then he looked up at me and said, "What is this?" His voice was lower than I expected, measured, the voice of someone who chose every word. Ethiopian Yirgacheffe, single origin, natural process. He looked at the cup again, then back at me. "You didn't ask what I wanted." "No." A pause. "Why not?" I didn't know how to answer that without it sounding strange, so I said, "You looked like you needed something honest." Something shifted in his face. I couldn't quite read it. It was there, and then it wasn't, locked away somewhere behind very good composure. He looked back down at the cup and said nothing for a moment. Then, "Do you always make assumptions about what people need?" "Only when I'm pretty sure I'm right." He almost smiled. Almost. It barely got to the corners of his mouth, and then it pulled back, like he'd remembered something. He finished the coffee. He put a 20 on the counter, which was a $12 tip on an $8 cup of coffee, and he walked out. He came back the next morning. Same time, same stool, second from the left. I had the cup ready by the time he sat down. He noticed that too, I could tell. The slight pause, the way he looked at the cup and then at me. But he didn't say anything. He just drank. And then he said, "How did you learn to do this?" "YouTube, books, a secondhand machine I fixed with replacement parts and a prayer." He looked up. "Self-taught?" "Mostly." "Where did you train?" "Rockford, Illinois, my grandmother's kitchen." Something in his expression that I would not call softness, but was adjacent to it. He looked at the cup. "This is better than anything I've had at any of the roasters I've visited, and I have visited considerable." "I believe you. I'm not complimenting you to be polite." "I know," I said. "You don't seem like someone who does anything to be polite." That almost smile again, quicker this time. He came back the 3rd morning, and the 4th, and the 5th. By the end of the 2nd week, it wasn't just the coffee. We were talking. Small things at first. I had mentioned a new bean I was trialing. He'd ask a specific question that told me he actually knew what I was talking about, and we'd be off. He knew coffee the way someone knows a subject they've spent years studying quietly, for themselves, with nobody to impress. He'd been to the farms in Ethiopia and Colombia and talked about them not with the flexing energy of someone who wanted you to know he'd been there, but with the particular focus of someone who went because he genuinely needed to understand where the thing came from. I started looking forward to those mornings. I'll just say it, I started making sure I was the one at the counter when he came in. Jordan noticed. Jordan notices everything despite pretending he doesn't, and he is constitutionally incapable of not saying things he's noticed. "He's very handsome," Jordan said to me one evening after close, wiping down the counter with enormous nonchalance. "He's a customer," I said. "He tips like he's apologizing for something." "Jordan, I'm just observing." Caleb, from the corner booth where he was doing the nightly receipts, said without looking up, "His name is Noah Ashford." I stilled. "How do you know that?" Caleb finally looked up, and there was something in his expression that I didn't understand yet, something careful and a little sad. "Because I Googled him the 2nd morning he came in, Eli." A pause. "He runs the building next door." The silence in last card at 10 p.m. after close is its own thing. The city is still going outside, but in here it's just the refrigeration hum and the last of the heat from Jordan's ovens and the smell of the day. Coffee and butter and flour and something warm that I don't have a name for, but that I think might just be the three of us in a room we made from nothing. That night it felt different. Caleb showed me on his phone Ashford Group's website, the development page, the projects page, and there it was, West Randolph Expansion Phase 3. A rendering of what the block would look like when it was done. Sleek and glass and continuous, the tower extending out over where we stood, over where the dry cleaner stood, over all of it. Our building was in the rendering. Where our building was, in the rendering, there was a lobby. "How long have they been planning this?" Jordan said. His voice had gone quiet in the way that meant he was furious but controlling it. "Months, from what I can tell. Maybe longer. The block's been flagged for acquisition. Most of the other tenants have already negotiated out or in the process." "But not us?" I said. "We weren't here when it started. We came in after." He hesitated. "I don't think they've approached us yet because we're new and small enough that they probably assumed that we'd fold on our own," Jordan finished. Caleb didn't answer, which was an answer. Jordan looked at me. I looked at the door, at the little bell above it, at the hand-painted sign Caleb had made, at the menu board with its 2 big letters. I thought about the woman who sat on the corner for 2 hours with her grandmother's biscuits and her cold coffee. I thought about the Tuesday mornings, the second stool from the left. I felt sick. He came in the next morning at the usual time. I was ready for him. I had his coffee ready. And then I stood there looking at it and thought about the rendering, the lobby where we stood, and something in me went very, very cold. He sat down. I put the cup in front of him without speaking, and then I moved to the other end of the counter and I started cleaning things that didn't need cleaning. A pause. "Everything all right?" "Fine." My voice came out flat, professional. "Good morning, sir. Here is your coffee. Have a nice day." The voice I used with people I didn't know. He was quiet for a moment. "You're not asking me about the new Kenya lot." I told him 2 days ago that I was trialing a Kenyan from a new importer and I wanted his opinion because he'd been to that particular region. "Busy morning," I said. Another pause, longer this time. When I finally looked up, he was watching me, and there was something on his face I hadn't seen there before. Not the polished executive expression, not even the almost smile. Something more open and more uncertain. Something that looked a little like a man who just realized a door he expected to walk through was closed. He finished his coffee. He left the tip. He did not say anything else. He came back the next morning and the morning after that, and every morning I gave him good coffee and professional courtesy and nothing more, and every morning he accepted it without protest, and I told myself this was the right thing. I told myself it was simple. He was a customer. This was a business. There was a conflict of interest the size of a glass tower between us. I was very sensible about it. I was also quietly falling to pieces. Jordan found me in the walk-in on a Friday. Not crying. I want to be clear that I was not crying. I was doing inventory and also sitting on a milk crate with my head in my hands, which is different. "Eli, I'm fine. You've been counting the same shelf for 20 minutes. I looked up. Jordan was leaning in the doorway, arms crossed, wearing his apron that had the flower handprint on the left side that he'd had for 3 weeks and claimed was a feature. His expression was doing the thing it does when he's concerned but trying not to make it weird, which is somehow the most overwhelming thing about Jordan West, that his care is so enormous he has to suppress it to avoid crushing people with it. He's trying to buy us out, the building. That's why he has access to our block, because his lawyers have probably been in contact with every tenant on this street. He comes here for coffee, that's all it is." Jordan was quiet for a moment. "Eli, has he ever once mentioned the building, the acquisition, anything about his company being interested in this block?" "No." "Has he ever made you feel like he's here for anything other than the coffee?" A long, careful pause. "No." "Then maybe," Jordan said carefully, "he's just a man who really likes your coffee. And maybe, I say this with tremendous fondness, you're using the acquisition thing as a reason to pull back from something that's scaring you." I didn't say anything. "I'm not saying he's not a problem. He probably is. His company probably is.
We should get a lawyer. We should figure out where we actually stand." He pushed off the doorframe. "I'm just saying, you went cold on him before you knew anything for sure. And that's not protecting the diner, that's protecting yourself. Which, for the record, I fully understand, but let's at least be honest about what we're doing." He left. I sat in the walk-in for another 5 minutes. Then I went out and I started counting the shelf again. Properly, this time. The letter arrived on a Monday. It was from Ashford Group's legal team. Formal, carefully worded, laying out the terms of an acquisition offer for the building and its lease. The number was generous. The timeline was aggressive. The message underneath all the legal language was clear. This is happening, and we are offering you the opportunity to be compensated for it. Jordan put it on the counter and stared at it. Caleb read it twice, folded it, put it in his back pocket, and said, "We need a lawyer." I stood there looking at the address on the letterhead. Ashford Group, West Randolph Street, Chicago, IL. 1 block away. I knew, logically, that a man like Noah Ashford did not personally write acquisition letters, that he had a legal team and a development team and a board of directors and probably a dozen people whose entire job was exactly this kind of thing. I knew that the morning conversations had nothing to do with real estate law. I knew all of this. It didn't help. When he came in the next morning, I looked at him sitting on his stool, and I thought about the letter in Caleb's pocket, and I put his coffee in front of him, and I said very quietly, "I know who you are." He looked up. "I know what your company is planning to do with this block." A long, careful silence. "Eli, don't." I kept my voice even. "You don't need to explain anything. You're a customer. I'm a barista. You have lawyers. That's fine. We'll respond through the appropriate channels." He set the cup down. "That's not... I didn't come here because of the acquisition." "I know you didn't." "Then it doesn't matter why you came," I said. And I could hear myself doing it, could hear the familiar pull of retreating, going quiet, making it clean and professional and safe, the thing Jordan had named in the walk-in, protecting yourself. It matters what comes next, and what comes next is a business transaction between two parties. That's what this is. He looked at me for a long time. I looked back. There was something in his expression that I'd never seen on him, a kind of careful, stripped-down openness that his face usually didn't allow, like the composure was still there but barely, and behind it was something much less certain. He picked up his coffee. He drank it. He put $20 on the counter, and he walked out, and the bell above the door rang once. And then it was quiet. The next 3 weeks were the longest weeks of my life.
We got a lawyer, a real one. Caleb knew someone from Rockford, Illinois, a woman named Patricia who wore remarkable shoes and spoke in full, complete sentences, and who, after reviewing the acquisition documents, told us that we had legal standing to contest the timeline and potentially the terms, and that, if we wanted to fight it, we could fight it. We said yes. Noah came into last card every morning. He sat on his stool, he drank his coffee, he tipped. He did not try to speak to me about anything other than the coffee, and I served him and kept my voice professional and my distance steady. It was terrible. I don't know how to describe it more precisely than that. It was just terrible. To be in the same room as someone and feel the absence of something you'd only had for a few weeks and already couldn't imagine not having. The morning conversations about single origins and processing methods, and the specific way altitude affects a bean's sugar development, the almost smile, the way he sat like a man who had been allowed, for 30 minutes, to just exist without being the most important person in the room. I missed it the way you miss something you should have been more careful with.
Jordan missed it on my behalf and was extremely vocal about this at close every night, until Caleb told him to let me process at my own pace, at which point Jordan switched to communicating his opinions through pointed facial expressions, which is somehow worse. The mediation meeting was on a Wednesday. A conference room in a building on the Loop, neutral ground. Our lawyer, Patricia, in her remarkable shoes, the Ashford Group's legal team, a mediator, a lot of documents, and, to my genuine surprise, Noah. He came in when I was already seated, and we looked at each other across the conference table for a moment that lasted slightly too long. He looked tired, not in the way he looked that first morning, when tired was just the weight of a long, difficult day. This was something more sustained, something that had been going on for weeks. The meeting was professional and cold, and I will not walk you through the numbers because numbers are not the story here. The story is that at one point, the mediator asked if all parties had reviewed the revised timeline, and I looked up from the documents and found Noah looking at me. Not at the papers, not at our lawyer, at me. And the expression on his face was so unguarded and so quietly wrecked that I had to look away. Patricia did beautifully. We left the meeting with a contested timeline and documentation that gave us leverage we hadn't had before. I walked out onto the Loop and stood on the sidewalk in the November cold and tried to figure out what I was feeling. Jordan and Caleb were behind me, talking quietly. The lake was somewhere in the distance doing lake things, and the city was continuing its city business entirely without my input. Caleb's hand came to my shoulder. "You okay?" "Yeah," I said. "You?" He smiled. Caleb's smiles are almost always genuine, but this one had that particular quality I'd been noticing more often lately. Warmth on the surface, something careful underneath, something he was managing very precisely. "Always," he said. I looked at him for a second longer than he expected. He glanced away. "Always," I thought. "Sure." The board meeting happened on a Friday. I know because Jordan had a news alert set for Ashford Group developments, a fact that Jordan claimed was purely strategic and that Caleb and I were never going to stop gently roasting him for. The alert came through at approximately 2 in the afternoon. Ashford Group board convenes on West Randolph expansion timeline. We had a full house that afternoon. Jordan's Queen Amman was doing its thing in the case, and Caleb was charming a table of 5 who had come in just to see what the fuss was about. And I was behind the counter making coffee and trying not to think about what was happening 1 block over. I made it through close. I cleaned the machine, I wiped down the counter. Jordan left first. He had a thing, he said, that may or may not have involved the name Liam, but which he absolutely did not say out loud, and which we were all absolutely cataloging silently. Caleb stayed to finish the receipts, and then he stood up and stretched and said goodnight, and the doorbell rang, and it was just me. I turned off the main lights, left the counter light on. I always do. I like the way it looks, the diner half dark with just that warm bar of gold on the wood. I started on tomorrow's prep list. It was 5:30 in the morning, not 5:30 at night. I'd lost track. I do that sometimes when I'm in the zone. I was measuring green beans for the morning roast, and I had my podcast on low, and the Chicago morning was starting to turn that particular dark blue outside the front windows. And I was okay. I was in my place. I was doing my thing. The knock on the front door was so quiet I almost didn't hear it. I looked up. He was outside on the step. Noah Ashford in his $4,000 suit, sitting on the front step of Last Card like a man who had no idea what to do next. And I could see, even through the window, even in the half-dark, that something had changed. He looked like a man who had put something down, a very heavy thing he'd been carrying for a very long time. He wasn't performing anything. He was just there, tired and present, and entirely without pretense. I stood still for a long moment. Then I went to the door and I opened it. He looked up at me. "You're early," I said. "I know." A pause. "Make me a coffee." I looked at him for a moment. At his face, at the particular quality of his stillness, not the controlled stillness of a man managing his environment, but the stillness of a man who had stopped managing, who had run out of moves and decided, maybe for the first time in a very long time, to just stop. "Come in," I said. He came inside, sat at the counter, second stool from the left. He took off his jacket. He didn't say anything. I turned to the machine. It was quiet in the diner. The blue of the early morning coming through the windows, the hum of the refrigerator, the familiar sounds of the machine. The board was furious, he said behind me. I kept working. I killed it. The acquisition, the whole expansion. I filed the paperwork last night. He was quiet for a moment. My lawyers want a meeting. My brothers have called 4 times. I heard Liam called twice. He thinks it's a pivot, a strategy. Is it? A long pause. No. I turned and put the cup in front of him, the same as the first day. Ethiopian Yirgacheffe, single origin, clean and honest. He looked at it. Why? I asked. He picked up the cup. He held it. He didn't drink yet. Because, he said slowly, like he was finding the words one at a time, I sat at the head of that table and listened to every number and every argument and every projection, and the only thing I could think about was that you hum in the morning when you're making the first roast. He paused. I've never told you that I know that. I looked up at him. You hum, he said. I can hear it sometimes, when I'm the first one in, before you know I'm there. And it's not a song exactly. It's just a sound, like you're somewhere else, somewhere good. He finally looked up at me. I've never in my life made a decision I couldn't justify to a room full of people, and I cannot justify this one. I have no argument for it. I just could not take the thing that makes that sound out of the world.
The morning was going blue and gold outside. I thought about everything I should say. The practical things, the lawyers, the contested timeline, the fact that Patricia was going to need to be called, the fact that this changed everything and also did not change what it was and what we were, and the very complicated space between a man with a glass tower and a man with a second-hand espresso machine. I thought about Rockford, Illinois, and my grandmother's kitchen, and $301, and a bag of coffee, and a dream that was also literally the last card. I thought about what Jordan said in the walk-in. You're protecting yourself, which I understand, but let's be honest about what we're doing. I looked at Noah Ashford. He looked back. You're going to have to start over, with me, properly. I know. No angles, no strategies. None. And you have to tell Derek you found someone else to make your coffee, because I have a feeling that man has been suffering long enough. Something happened to Noah's face that I was not prepared for, and I say that as a man who thought by this point that he'd seen all of Noah's faces. It was the smile, the real one, not the almost smile, not the barely there pull at the corner of the mouth, the actual thing. Full and sudden and very slightly helpless, like it had happened to him rather than by him. Derek cried when I told him. Tears of relief? He said, and I quote, Mr. Ashford, this is the best day of my professional life. I laughed, out loud, in the empty diner in the early morning, and Noah's smile turned into something warmer, and the light was coming through the windows now for real, the gold of it sliding across the counter, across his hands around the cup. Ethiopian Yirgacheffe, he said, and drank. You still make it like you're saying something. I am. It's just that now you're close enough to hear it. I don't usually tell this story. But here's what I'll tell you. There is a version of that morning where I don't open the door, where I stay behind the counter and let him sit on the step in his suit until he gets cold and goes back to his glass tower, and we spend 3 months negotiating through lawyers and come to some arrangement that keeps Last Card alive, but keeps us strangers. There is a very sensible, very Eli Carter version of that morning. I chose different. And every morning since, when the alarm goes off at 5:15 and the city is still mostly dark and I'm standing at the machine doing the first roast, I notice that I hum. I always have. I just didn't know anyone was listening. I don't mind now that he knows. The diner is still there. The sign is still crooked. Jordan is still threatening to quit every Thursday, and Caleb is the one who talks him out of it, or he was until recently. Something changed with Caleb somewhere. a quietness underneath the charm that I'd been noticing for a while and couldn't name. I noticed Declan Ashford walking past the window last Tuesday morning. He stopped, just for a moment, barely a breath, and looked inside. Caleb was at the counter. He looked up. They didn't say anything. The window was between them. Declan kept walking, but Caleb stood there for a little longer than he needed to after. I noticed. I didn't say anything. I just made another pot of coffee and let the morning be what it was. End of part 1. Coming next, the trio isn't just 3 people running a diner anymore. The middle brother fell through the door looking for the perfect pastry and found something a lot more difficult. Jordan West does not take criticism well. Liam Ashford is very, very good at falling in love with who he imagines people to be. Neither of them was ready for what the other one actually was. Part 2, Liam and Jordan, coming soon.